All right, hello everyone, and welcome back. We're continuing along, and as we mentioned in the last part, we're going to be focusing on the back end of this guy. As I was looking at these references and gathering some new ones, I kind of noticed this watermark on everything. I don't really know what that's referring to, but it's there. Thought I would just point that out in case you guys noticed it already. But like I said, we're going to be focusing, as promised, on this ruler portion. It really isn't the most complicated piece, but the reason I wanted to pause in the last part and sort of break it down is because there's a couple things going on. I just wanted to make sure I knew how everything was attached and sort of worked together before I started piecing it piece by piece together. And honestly, kind of breaking it down and figuring out how they all slot together isn't really the most entertaining thing in the world. So I decided to do that off camera. Just like before, I just sort of color coded everything so I knew how it all slots together. Essentially, these end pieces are going to be the first things we make. Everything else sort of slots in on top. The only thing to sort of note is that this sort of bar here that these guys slide along seems to have grooves that end at a certain point so that these ruler pieces can't go any further left. Other than that, it seems pretty straightforward, but that might have been something I would have missed if I wasn't specifically paying a bit more attention. You see them over here on this one, but I think they're not really supposed to be over there. Yeah, with that being said, let's just go ahead and dive into that. One other thing, though, is I noticed the thickness of these back pieces. It seems to be a little bit off on ours, even if we look at our main references here. These ones seem a little bit thicker than what we have going on. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that right now. It should be pretty quick. I want to pull these out without disturbing the rest of this stuff. So the easiest way that I can go ahead and do that is, first of all, by just detaching these faces. I'm going to select them all, shift right click, and extract faces. Quick and easy, so it's on mesh now. Select these verts and just sort of scale them in a little bit. Obviously, we're not going to make it that thick. It's just something we can work with at the moment. The next thing I'm going to do is isolate this piece here. Interesting how that needs to be filled. That's probably where the hole was in the last part. Mystery solved. But essentially what I want to do is sort of have this edge go all the way up and all the way down, and then I can extrude it forward. So let's go ahead and make that happen. This is obviously not going to be the most proper geometry, but we're going to, of course, clean that up later on. So I'm just going to add a cut there, snap it along Z just so that everything is lined up. I guess we can go ahead and do some cleanup like so. And that's good. And then the same thing on the bottom here. Just using the cut tool to roughly line it up. And then using our vertex snapping to get it precise. Do a rough cleanup here. Cool. So that's one side taken care of. And now we gotta do it on this side. This guy, right, he isn't actually attached, so this makes it a little bit easier. I'm gonna move him out here for now. We are gonna have to take him, or bring him another visit in a sense, because it seems like what's actually going on back here with this guy. It's a bit more complex than how we currently have it set up, but right now we're not going to be focusing on that. We're going to have one more part where we're focusing on all the little knickknacks before we dive into the keyboard part, and that guy will definitely fall into that category. Definitely not in need of its own like full chapter, that's for sure, but definitely needs to be addressed anyways. Let's just close that guy off there. And one last one. Snapping these guys, so they're all lined up. Cool. So now the reason we did that is so we can grab these guys. Essentially just hit E and extrude them out a little bit more. I'm going to unhide everything so we can get the thickness right, and I'm keeping an eye on this. The thing is, I don't even want it to be that much thicker, only about this much or so. I was just finding it was definitely a bit too thin. And when it's set up this way, we sort of have this angle, which is totally fine. I think it actually works pretty well. So maybe a 1 will do. And with the setup, it makes it a lot easier to change it really quickly. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. We'll have to clean that up when we're doing the low poly. But anyways, let's get this guy back into place. Gonna mesh combine. This piece here, I'm even just going to stretch them out a little bit. I know I shouldn't be finicking with this right now, but can't really help it. Let's just go ahead and snap. Whoa. Snap these faces back. And that should do for now. Yeah, now it's looking definitely a bit more filled up. It also seems like this bottom piece is a little bit higher. I'm just noticing that this window seems smaller in general. So let's go ahead and raise this up a little bit as well. So right, now that that's out of the way, we're making this ruler. I also want to make this bar across. And then from there, that's almost the entire back other than this little guy. But like I said, like our final part is going to be this and kind of like this spinny guy and a couple of those little knickknacks. Maybe revisit this bell piece, stuff like that. So I'm not too worried about that, and I'm not really counting that for this chapter. Let's go ahead and start on this ruler though. And the first piece is going to be these little green side pieces. So here's a clearer image. Essentially what they are is just the piece that kind of bolts everything together. As you can see, this sort of notched one goes in beside. This one clips down on top. And then the other two jam into the side as well. So we're going to have to get this one into place before we do anything else. To me, it kind of seems like a straight rectangular piece that sort of tapers out a little bit at the end before coming around. This is a good time to kind of observe the 3D model. I know it's not super clear. But it gives us a good idea as to how thick it is. Yeah, and more or less, thin piece chamfers out at the end. What this was really good for is, you may have seen it in my reference already, getting a better idea as to what these guys are and their shapes. So this is going to be pretty useful later on. But for now, let's just go ahead and make those end pieces. Start by create polygon primitives and cube. It's nice because we only have to make one, and then we can more or less duplicate it over. Let's start by poke face. Get this guy completely lined up. What's the best way to go about this? Probably, let's get the thickness down first. In general, it's a pretty thin piece. And let's start with the thickest part. So even when rotated, it's still within the thickness of this cube here. So it's pretty thin, pretty short as far as that goes. And then it extrudes up, comes in a decent amount, and then comes up again. I might have overdone it a little bit. Let me thicken this guy up a little bit. It's a bit more like that. And then the bottom seems to have a beveled edge as well. Another thing to note is the bottom seems to be a bit closer to it, like so. So now if we sort of put this here, I kind of want to scale it up. If we put this here and rotate it a little bit, I'm looking at this and it seems that it rotates past this edge, so that's a good indicator of the angle. There's something along these lines. The height is something that's pretty important to get. The height of this seems to go higher than this, about level with these guys here. So we're a little bit off. That might just be because of our height of other things though. So regardless, I'm going to make it a bit taller. Yeah, it seems a little bit shorter than these guys, so maybe up to where the bolt starts. Let's go into our side view. I'd say about there seems to be correct, but then it makes me want to do something along these lines. And also thicken it all up a little bit. And I think that's what we're going for. If I zoom out, I do want to make it actually a bit chunkier too. We'll start with that and see how it goes. But yeah, let's get some of the easier ones out of the way first. It kind of seems like this on the bottom is just a extruded cube with some holes in it, so that's pretty easy. We should be able to tackle that no problem. The first thing I want to do though is duplicate this guy to the other side. Let's mirror it by putting our pivot in the middle, holding X of course to snap our pivot point, freeze transformations, delete history, and mirror X. There we go, got one on both sides now. We might redo that later because we're going to add a bolt to it, but this is more or less to get everything in place, and then we'll finalize things a little bit more later on. But yeah, let's start with this cube going across. It seems to be angled at the same angle as this guy, which is going to make it pretty easy to sort of keep things consistent. So we can move this guy over. Can poke face to sort of center this guy. And then rotate. It's not going to be perfect. I've frozen the transformation so we don't have an exact rotation value to sort of mimic. But it should be fine either way. Okay, so it seems like this is jammed into it, so it's not sticking out at all. But it's still, the thing that's throwing me off is it seems rather large, which means maybe I underestimated the scale on these guys. Either way, let's start with this and see how it looks once we've extended it all the way over. Just gonna snap this. And then we don't necessarily have to mirror this, we can just snap it. And I think as far as scale goes, that seems fine actually. It might even be larger than I expected. Yeah, in fact, I'm actually going to scale it down a little bit. Yeah, that's looking pretty accurate to the reference if I turn the wireframe off. Scale-wise, that seems to be good. What I am going to do is, it does seem like this isn't really going through or anything. I'm just checking the 3D reference as well. It seems like it's just kind of resting, or maybe it is going through. I think for the sake of this, we're going to assume that it's cutting through, and since we're doing that, we're going to Boolean these guys. And since we're going to Boolean it, I might as well just delete this half, focus on the one, and then duplicate it over when it's completely finished. Which isn't going to be too big of a deal. All we're going to have to do is Boolean this one side, Boolean this screw. And I think this is the only other one that we actually do a bool for, so we'll hold off on the mirroring over for a little bit longer. But let's get the things that we can get done now out of the way. Start by deleting those with a control backspace. I'm going to duplicate this, shift select this, and we're going to bring these guys into isolation mode so I can punch a hole through with our Boolean. I'm going to freeze transforms and delete history on both of these guys. Open up our Bool manager, click our main, shift select our cutting mesh, and go to new Boolean operation with difference selected. Delete history and base objects. Let's do a quick little cleanup by snapping these verts to places. Sort of connecting all these up. You can use the cutting tool for this. That has a hotkey on my computer. I think I mentioned that before. Either way, nothing too complex, pretty quick. And merge all those guys. So the reason I did it this way is, yeah, once again, so we get that smooth sort of bevel when you bring it into ZBrush. And then on this side, I can snap this guy all the way through. Sweet. And obviously, like, you'd never see that, but we're going to be filling it in anyways when we're doing our low poly. So it's totally fine. So that's one. Now we can focus on getting this bolt. Another pretty simple one. We're going to isolate this guy on its own now. Let's put a cylinder there. I'm going to be using this plugin that I'm finding quite handy. So if you have a face selected and you press the cylinder, it'll automatically snap it. What you guys can do if you don't have this is, of course, just the poke face and then snap it and rotate it into position. This is just going to save me a little bit of time. Go into my wireframe so I know exactly how deep it's sort of penetrating the surface. Just like before, freeze our transforms, new Boolean operation, and delete history and base objects. Nice. Can go ahead and poke face there. And borrow a screw, or maybe we can even add a different kind if there's one that's more accurate to this guy. Perhaps this one seems to do the trick. And like I said, I did include some screws for you guys if you do want to use those, and I'll also have links to tutorials where you can make your own. I thought for this specific tutorial it wasn't fully worth diving into that kind of stuff, since we're covering so many other things. So hopefully you guys understand that. Let's go ahead and pull this back. And maybe I'm going to do something along these lines so it's sticking out a little bit more. Of course, we are going to have to color this guy red. And it's matching the reference pretty good. So that's this bottom part taken care of. Let's move on to this middle cylindrical part. Oh, right, we have to get these little nubs, these little holes in first. And it also seems something's connecting to it, but this is probably a piece we're going to have to tackle when we're working on the guts of this machine, which honestly from the back don't look as intimidating as I thought. I say that now, but it's probably going to be crazy once we're actually doing it. Let's just focus on this main cylindrical piece first, which should be pretty straightforward, all things considered. Let's duplicate this one. It's a really good starting piece. And about how high is this cutting through? Not very high. It's about here. How I'm going to do this is I'm going to add a cut about so, and then that way I can poke face from here and sort of have somewhere to snap this to. Just because I still want it to be in the exact middle. So I'm going to loosely line this up, and then we're going to go tackle those holes in the rectangular piece. Just snap this to where this guy ends. Should be good. And then I want this to be a little bit thinner, it seems like, according to this. Cool. But yeah, let's get back on track with this guy. What's going on here? We have two holes here, and there's something filling it. But realistically, I don't think, all things considered, when we bake this down, whatever's in there is going to really pop through the texture, let alone do we know exactly what's going on in there. So I'm going to punch the holes in there. Not necessarily going to fill it up with anything. Same with up here, because you'll probably never notice it with the texture the way it is. Yeah, especially at the resolution we're going to be using. There's no way you're going to really see anything in there. So let's go ahead and punch holes. It seems like there's two, and then potentially some on the other side, but we can't see that, nor do I think there's an angle where you could see it, so we're just going to focus on these two. And I'm going to keep it off screen for right now. Let's get some cylinders on there by selecting the face. And we got this guy. Just going to position him. Maybe one here and one here. And then we're going to do the same up here. It seems like it's right before the middle in the reference. So select this face, pressing the cylinder button. But once again, these are all things you can do without the plugin. I'm just speeding up time a little bit for your guys' convenience and mine as well. Considering you guys probably know how to do this kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't need to show you once again how to really line that up, because I just showed it over here and several other times in the tutorial. So at this point, we just really want to get to our high poly and keep this as fast as we can. So let's combine all these guys. I kind of want to nudge this one over a little bit. Yeah, and just another Boolean. So select our main, shift select our cutting mesh, new Boolean operation, cleanup, delete history in base objects, and that seems to be good. Nice. We can go back to this guy here. So this one's pretty straightforward, like I mentioned earlier. The only thing that's a little bit different is this groove here, so that these guys can slide along it. Getting a groove like that isn't too difficult. One thing I am going to do, though, to make it a bit easier is actually get rid of some edge loops. And the reason I want to do that, potentially, I'm not totally sold on this idea, but if I get rid of some edge loops like that, then we have larger sort of like surface per face for us to cut things into, and it becomes a lot less complicated. The only issue is potentially bringing this into ZBrush and having it not be round enough to auto smooth. Let's see. This should be fine considering it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think I'm just going to make another cylinder with maybe like 14 faces or something. Because I think the previous one was 20 that we copied from up here. So 14 should sort of be the happy middle ground. And it's a really quick fix. So yeah, by default it's 20. Let's get 14. So it's round enough, but it's not over the top. Typically, like a piece like this to have 20 faces is quite a lot. So let's just match this. Snap it like we did over here. There's one. Snap this to where this guy's lined up. And we're good. We do need to cut a hole in this guy like we did at the bottom. This time I don't want to punch it all the way through. I just kind of want it to be resting inside of this metal component. So I'm going to delete those guys and prep a Boolean for us by duplicating this piece, shift selecting the piece we're cutting from. Let's just isolate these guys so it's easier to work with. Freeze, transform, delete history, and we can go ahead and select the two of them, new Boolean, delete history and base objects. And we're good. Oh right, I didn't want to get the backside. Quick way to fix that maybe would be to delete these, fill hole, fill hole, merge face to center, delete that guy. Cool. So we close that off. I just added an edge loop to sort of start that. Didn't really mention that part. And then we can push this inside a little bit. But yeah, let's focus on getting that groove. So I kind of want to look at this reference. I want to see how many groove lines there are. It isn't the most clear. There's one, two, it kind of just seems like. That was the vibe I was getting from all these references, but we just can't see the other side. So it's 1, 2, it seems like maybe there's one at the top and then one forward. So maybe these two. Pretty easy to make. We're just going to be using a Boolean pretty much to be cutting from this. I think that'd be the easiest way to do it. And then it seems to stop maybe in the first third, so it's 2/3 with a groove. So we have to consider that as well when we're cutting. I think for this guy I'm going to start with a cube. Or maybe... I think a cylinder would probably be better. But we're going to turn the segments down to something like 8. Rounded cap, we're going to press 1 so it's on, or you can type on. Subdivisions cap, we're going to turn up to 3. And that should do it. We're going to rotate this guy 90 degrees. Grab these verts on the end and stretch it out. And then in object mode, just really skinny this guy out. And I'm sure you can sort of see what we're getting at here as far as booling this into it. So skinning this out. We're going to have one in the front like so. I do kind of want to squash these ends so it's a little less aggressive. I want it to be a bit of a smoother transition. The other end doesn't matter because it's going to be hanging off anyways. But sort of one in the front. Right around here. And then one maybe this one's about here. This one's about here. They do seem pretty close to one another, so yeah, something along these lines. Let's give it a test and then see how it goes. Gonna mesh combine these guys. Freeze transform, delete history. I'm going to go ahead and save first because it's kind of a weird boolean, so I don't really know what's going to happen. Okay, let's give this a shot. Open up our boolean manager. Let's actually isolate these so we have a better look. And then one thing I forgot to do before doing that is sort of line this up correctly. So it's like, yeah, like the last third doesn't have the rail groove. Along those lines there, yeah. Okay. Freeze transform, delete history. New Boolean operation. And then if we delete history and base objects, turn off wireframe. Yeah, that's more or less the grooves we're going for, especially since when we bring it into ZBrush and smooth it out, it's kind of hard to display right now. But it's really going to decrease the size of the grooves. So I'm totally fine with how it is right now. Yeah, so that should be good the way it is. All we have to do now is this top piece, which definitely seems to be the most complex, but it's not that complicated. And then just sort of get these guys, which should be fine because it's just one that we're duplicating over and over. So let's start with this one. This is just a rectangular piece stretching across that seems to overlap a little bit. And it has these grooves that start with these sort of notches. So my main question is how these connect, because they are overlapping a little bit, so it is kind of hard to say. I'm going to assume that there's a piece that does stick in, and then these are just sort of like clipped onto the front. So I'm going to go with that idea and hope that's it. And then it seems like it's connected to the very tip top, and then this is resting on top of that. So we can use our cutting technique once again. To poke a face for us to snap things to. I'm going to go ahead and just plop a cube down, see if this works. Somewhat. Just got to rotate it. I really should have written down what angle we rotated this main piece at, since everything's sort of dependent on it. I just didn't realize how many square pieces there were opposed to circular ones, since we've been mostly working with cylinders up until now. But regardless, this is the last piece, so it should be fine. I'm going to make this just a little bit lower. So we don't get any weird Z fighting since we're not at the exact same angle. Bring this guy up a little bit. I'll keep the reference in line so you guys can sort of tell what I'm doing. So yeah, my comprehension of this is going to be like a smaller piece like this that goes across, that stretches across, and then these guys are going to be resting in front and behind. So I'm going to have this about here, this about here, snap this to where the rest of these guys are, and then introduce a another piece for the front and the back. The best way to do that would probably be to just duplicate this guy. It's way too long to deal with right now, so I'm going to scale it in. Yeah, so this guy overlaps a little bit. Let's just totally bring it in so that our gizmo by default is more or less lined up. Let's bring this guy into place. It kind of makes me want to take this and push it up so this is hanging, and then from here stretch that across, which makes sense. Yeah, I think that works pretty good. These pieces kind of being loosely connected, obviously we would never want that to be how the low poly is attached, but everything's going to sort of have gaps between them anyways when we start smoothing them in ZBrush, so it's fine for now. It's just something to take note of and address right now as well, because I know you guys might be worried about that. It's all going to be taken care of when we start making the actual low poly of the mesh. So let's go ahead and add these cuts in. They should be pretty simple to make. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to duplicate this guy, move him down about as deep as these grooves are, so about halfway. I'm going to scale it to the size of the cuts. So they're about this thin. Get it into position. We're going to be using them as Boolean meshes, so we have to make sure it's thick enough to cut everything. And then we're going to use a smart duplicate to get a bunch of them beside each other at the same time. So once we have that lined up, we can freeze, transform, select history, and go to edit, duplicate special. We might have to finick around with this a little bit. So geometry, copy. So we're going to want to translate these a little bit as we go. So let's see, for example, we want it to probably move minus .225. That's the distance we want it to keep going over and over. So translate XYZ. This is along X. So minus 0.225. We don't want it to affect the rotation. We don't want it to affect the scale. So we'll leave it all at 1. Number of copies, 29. Let's try it. Oh, we have to have it selected. Yeah, and it's going to duplicate it. Obviously, 29 doesn't seem to be enough. So let's undo that and do like 100. The one thing I'll say that I don't like about this is you just have to sort of know that this is XYZ or XYZ. It should label it properly. It just doesn't. But just assume that the first one is X. It's going across. 100 is still not enough. Interesting. It does make me want to thicken this up a little bit because I think over 100 of these is kind of insane. So I want to thicken it up a little bit. Freeze, transform, select history, and then let's test again. Maybe let's do 0.28 apart. It's almost there. Let's do 150. It's too many. 125. Because we're trying to get right to where this groove is. And of course we could manually duplicate some over, but I'm just going to keep testing. Let's do 135. Seems to be good. We can just delete some extra ones. And of course we're using this as a Boolean mesh, so let's go ahead and combine them all. Freeze, transform, select history, and we're going to be cutting out of this guy here. Once again, risky Boolean. We should go ahead and save before we do anything. And let's get started. Click, shift click our cutting mesh, new Boolean operation. I kind of want to, where's the pivot on this? I kind of just want to raise it a little bit. Yeah, and it's definitely chugging a little bit. Something like that. I'm considering something a little bit different right now. You see how these are a bit thicker. The thicker they are, the more awkward it's going to be to bake down. Ideally, I wouldn't have actual geometry for these pieces because it's just way too much. Like this, we could have it be a 6-sided cube, or we could have it be a several hundred, if not thousand, triangle piece if we have all these cuts be actual geometry. So I want to make this a normal map. And in order to make it a normal map, I'm going to need these pieces to actually be a bit thinner. So I'm just going to undo all of this and stick to my guts and make this a really thin piece so that we can confidently bake it down. Let's see the number. Let's go with a transition of we could do 0.2. Go back to our duplicate special, minus 0.2. We're gonna need more than that, probably 200 is a good start. That was a pretty close guess. Let's try 180. 185? Perfect. Sweet, okay. So yeah, this seeing as it's a lot thinner, it's going to be easier to bake down, because when you're baking down a hole in something, there's nothing on the other side to actually bake. So that information is just sort of nothing. It's just a dip, and then at the center of that dip is nothingness. So the thinner that is, the less obvious it's going to be. So let's go ahead and make these as thin as possible. Mesh combine these guys. And then try that Boolean again. Clean up, delete history and base objects. I just did that off screen, but it should be fine. But yeah, I think that looks a lot better anyways. And from a distance like this, you can't really see through anyway, so it's going to be easier to bake down. Cool stuff. We got to go ahead and duplicate it to the other side. I kind of want to take this guy in the back and snap him forward so he is flush with this new ruler piece we made. So I'm snapping him here, so that way he's lined up perfectly. I guess that doesn't work because it's going through. We'll leave it for now. If it's an issue, we can fix it in the high poly stage. And then from here, duplicate this guy. Get him into position here. Just going to move the pivot here so it's easier to work with. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. I'm noticing in this reference that this is sort of off-center too. I kind of like how that looks. Any kind of asymmetry is typically a bonus. I don't know if we should really be worrying about this right now. Just moving my move type to world. Sliding this over a little bit. Maybe I could put it on this side to... No, I like it on this side. Just to see what balances the rest of the scene out. But yeah, having it being a little off-center is definitely a bit more interesting. Especially when this is going to have a big circular piece here. We need more stuff on the left to sort of balance that out. Cool. What we have to do now is add this top piece. Which, all things considered, looks pretty simple. Looks more or less like we duplicate this. I just set my move type to world so I can move it up like so. I'm going to put my pivot here. Didn't mean to do that. Let's center pivot. Let's just snap so we really seal this all off. Let's grab the bottom face, snap it up here. Maybe grab this face on this guy, snap it up here as well. Okay. And then this should be lined up to the end. I'm wondering if it's time to mirror this guy over now. Because we have this guy plugging in, but you can't really see where it's sticking in at like any angle. It might even be easier rather than using a Boolean mesh to hit Control E, offset this guy in a little bit, hit Enter or W. Changing our scale tool to component and just sort of manually making a cut. And just extruding that in. So now if I isolate that, you can see what I mean. I just added a cut in for when we smooth this out inside of ZBrush. But with that done, we should be able to duplicate this guy over. I'm going to combine these two. Just for the time being, I'm just combining the bolts with the main piece, moving the pivot in the middle like before, and mirroring over X. From here, we can select the two bolts and extract faces. Combine the two faces, or the two bolts rather. And now that's mirrored over. We can make sure everything's lined up properly. Seems to be for the most part, other than this guy. Needs to be lined up with the top. And then I'm going to actually combine these two. They were overlapping a little bit on this side. So let's take a look. That seems to be fine. What we're gonna have to do is have this sort of like metal rim, rounded pieces at the end, put some bolts in it, and that's gonna be good for that guy. Should be surprisingly simple to make. That these two end pieces are just extrusions, and then these rounded pieces we can add in afterwards. So starting with the metal, I might want them to be separate pieces just for when we smooth it in ZBrush. Either way, I'm going to start by duplicating this, moving the pivot to the bottom, snapping it back down, making it a little bit thicker, adding a cut in the middle, beveling that cut so we get two equal cuts. And then deleting the middle ring, we can then, fill in these two holes. And that's this side. We need to get a rounded piece here that's just going to be part of a cylinder. In fact, we could probably just take it from this guy. I'm going to go ahead and use our good friend, the Smart Duplicate Face. Like if you already have things lying around, you might as well reuse them. So it seems like pretty much that. One thing I am going to do though is it doesn't seem to be smooth enough, so I'm going to smooth it out a little bit. Let's start by merging the verts. Let's fill this hole. And it doesn't seem to like when I bevel it. Why is that? Interesting. Are these not merged? We got some funky stuff going on in the middle. So it should be good now. Yes, okay. Something along those lines should be good. Let's move the pivot to the back, or rather center it and then move it to the back, and then snap it to this end, just so we sort of have a place to rest it by. Scale it down, maybe make it a little bit plumper. Bring these guys in so it's a little bit rounder. And this is all going to be baked down regardless. So once again, I don't know why I haven't just written this down at this point. I think it's like along the lines of 27 degrees. Yeah, don't be like me. Actually write this stuff down, or don't freeze your transforms. Because this is a bit more complicated than it has to be. Yeah, and it also seems like this one's raised up a little bit higher here. So we'll go for something like that. When it's smoothed out, it's going to be a lot easier to deal with. Let's center the pivot. Cool, and we can mirror this guy by moving our pivot to the middle. Nice. We just got to add a bolt, and that's these pieces done. Nice. There's a big gap here. Am I missing? Am I missing something? Right, this gigantic piece that's gonna fill everything in. It's coming. And then we'll have to shuffle some stuff around as we go as well. I'm just thinking that it feels like awkwardly empty here, and I still don't know what this is attached to. It seems like this is surrounded by more things at this point. We might just have to move all this around and down later on. We'll see though. Let's just focus on getting this part done, and then we can regroup in the next section. We're probably going to have a couple sections, ideally just one, where we're just sort of cleaning up things a little bit before we send it off to the high poly. But we might have to do that for that weird gap that's going on here. I think it honestly might just be this having to be a bit lower down. I feel like that would probably fill things up quite a bit. I'm just going to test it right now. We're not going to actually commit to these changes. But if I were to just put this like here, yeah, it feels a lot better. We'll see though. Let's just focus on getting this piece done, and then we'll probably call it apart. This bar we can throw into a different part. This bar might be better when we're doing this kind of stuff. It's more related anyways. This ruler piece is certainly enough for a piece on its own, especially since we still have these guys to take care of. So yeah, these bolts, simple enough. Little boolean, borrow a different screw, probably this one, stick it in. We also have to boolean this guy on the outside. So let's start with this. Going to add a cut in the middle. Boolean. Just know the edges there and there. You can take these two edges and with our scale tool set to world, we can just sort of push this out a little bit more. Go to poke face. So now we sort of have a place to rest a cylinder on. Let's go ahead and just drop a cylinder on there. Combine those two before we do our boolean. Let's get rid of these X's. And then, typical boolean fashion, new boolean, cleanup, delete history and base objects. It's cutting through directly to this piece underneath. But then all we really have to do is take these screws, smart duplicate face, since it's attached to the one on the other side. Snap to the middle, snap to the middle again. And then rotate based on object, so it's not super perfect. Or I guess this one's fine, we just have to do it on the other side. There we go. So I just selected the faces. Since I couldn't select the object and rotate it at an angle, I selected the faces, rotated them, and that was good enough. So that's that taken care of. We have these pieces now. This is our best reference of them, so they clip on to the front, sort of come to the back, and then just surround these the sort of bar with the groove. They have a little knob sticking out. This guy here, but all in all they seem pretty simple to put together. Okay, we've been recording for over an hour. I think, screw it, we'll just get them done in this part. No point in bringing them into the next chapter, especially since we only have to make one and then duplicate it around. They seem simple enough. I just hear my roommate walking around. I just know it might mess with the recording a little bit, but it should be fine. If I can edit anything out, I will. So let's rotate this at our 28 degrees roughly. Scale this based on object, so it's a bit tighter. Now let's just start with the first one off to the side. They are pretty thin as well. So the bottom seems to be rounded to sort of match the shape of the cylinder. So I'm adding an edge in here. I'm going to pull this down. Pull these up while simultaneously pulling these down. I can then sort of bevel the bottom. Select these ones as well to get into the bevel. Scale this in. It then seems like it goes up, but tapers in dramatically pretty quickly. Goes up a little, then out again. Then up to about here, where then only the front continues up, which seems to overlap and hook onto here. So I'm going to have to pull these forward, as well as push this back. This back seems to jut out a little bit more as well. It's a bit more like that. So I have a feeling it might clip here. It's the only reason there would be clips on both sides, so logically speaking, it kind of makes sense. And then I'm going to add little edge loops here so they can sort of hang over. This makes sense. Just because we don't really we can't really see too clearly in the reference what's going on, for any of the references for that matter. I guess we can see that going over. It doesn't seem to go over on the other side. But I kind of like the idea of it being clipped on both sides, so I'm going to go ahead and continue with that. I mean, we're going to have quite a lot of cleanup to do here, so let's get started with that. Firstly, by snapping these guys. It's just too much clutter. It's going to make things way too complicated to even just look at, so I'm going to start cleaning up. Just snap inverts all the way down. And then we'll have to do it on the other side as well. Yep. Okay. These sort of have like rounded tips. So we could go for something like that, but I don't know if it's quite worth it. Oh, weird. It doesn't seem like these are merged. What is going on here? There's like a face right here. Very weird. Let's bridge these guys back. So yeah, I could essentially extrude this out again and then bevel it like so. Yeah, that seems to be worth it. It's not like it's making too much of a difference, and we'll probably end up baking it down anyways. So just rounding it out like so. It does seem like it's a lot thicker in the back, like maybe damn, there's a lot of verts just chilling on top of each other here. Weird, how did this happen? I hope that makes it good. But what I was trying to say was, it seems like in the back here, it's okay, something's really weird. Everything has like 2 vertices. Okay, I'm gonna just try and edit mesh. Let's just go for a merge vertices and affect the threshold a little bit. So it's like 0.05, 0.01, 0.02, 0.015. Which should get rid of all the verts there. Anyways, what I was trying to say is it seems like this is not sort of like concaved in like it is on the other side. So I'm going to try and keep it a bit thicker. Still here too. Very strange. But yeah, for these I'm just going to pull them out a little bit. Maybe not this guy. Kind of seems more like what's going on here. We got to stick a bolt in it, stick in these little nubs, and then that probably will do it for this part. I want to scale it in slightly. I just don't really like how that looks being so thick. Even if it's not fully accurate, I do like it being a little bit thinner. Maybe just 2 pieces sticking out like that. I can work with that. That doesn't look so bad. But yeah, we gotta get the bolts in. The bolts seem like they rest roughly around here. So if we poke face, or we don't even have to do that if we use this tool. If we put a cylinder on there, get it roughly into position. We can go for a Boolean. Freeze transform, delete history. Delete history and base objects. And then we don't want one of these types of screws. So I'm going to snap it horizontally, vertically. Let's get the rotation set to world. And just sort of get this guy in there. Should be good. Yeah, that just leaves the little knobs. It seems like there's some connection pieces here, but it also seems like these ones are broken while this one's correctly in place. I don't think these are supposed to be leaning forward quite like that. This one also seems to have a material change, but based on these ones, they seem like they're all the same. I see what might be going on where this connection is like a separate piece. could kind of play with that idea. Let's try that out. I'm going to keep this one the way that it is, but for this guy, let's select these faces and extract them. So we'll have these two as their own mesh. Let's bridge this across. Bridge. Let's then move this in and fill this hole. And I'll explain why I'm doing this in just a second. Also have to fill this hole. And let's give it a color so we know that's a different part, like green. For this one, should be a bit easier. Bridge. And fill hole. Fill hole. This seems to be off slightly. Let's snap and snap so it's mirrored. Do the same on this side. Snap it there. So the reason I made these different parts is because it kind of looks like these clips are screwed in. That's why the screws are here, and they're just attached to these sort of larger metal slidey pieces. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from it. So if they are different pieces, we're going to sort of have some sort of distinct cut between them. This guy just sort of left how he was. Actually, it probably makes more sense to have this off. That's probably why we don't see any on the back, because there's no actual screw going into that piece. So I'm actually just going to delete that entirely. Okay, that starts to make a little bit more sense as to why that's constructed that way. When you really start to think about it and why things are the way they are, that makes way more sense. We also need to add a screw in here. Let's go ahead and do that by grabbing a cylinder. Forgot to do this earlier, that's why. Gotta make sure it's the same on both sides. Mesh combine. Freeze transform, delete history. New Boolean operation. Cleanup, delete history and base objects. Let's just copy these screws since they're close. And then bring that one over here. Nice. Right, we just need a little nub here. And that'll probably do it for this part. Seems simple enough. The only thing we really have to worry about is adding a bool. So once again, we're going to put a cylinder on there. Don't want it cutting in too deep. Freeze transforms. Boolean operation. Clean up, delete history and base objects. Like, these are pretty small rims, but when you smooth them, it does make a difference in ZBrush. So that's why I continue to do it. And then as far as these little nubs go, we can do a smart duplicate face. Let's move this by component. Extrude it. Reverse this back face. Shrink it down a little bit. Put it back in there. So I'm just looking at this. It seems like it has a rim and then comes out a little bit. So let's go ahead and extrude 0.005, 0.05, and scale it slightly. Control E, offset maybe 0.05, 0.04. Scale it in a bit more. Control E. Bring it out. We're going to want to scale this up a little bit. Actually, if we're going to do that, I want to scale this in a decent amount more. Control E, thickness. Trying to match the length of that. Scale it out a little bit. Grab the face, bevel it. Just want to drag that out a little bit more. Something along those lines, so it's a bit more of a tapered transition. Yep, pretty happy with that. And we'll give it the red color as well, so we know it's different. So this piece is done. We can actually Control G to group it. I'm going to change this to world, center our pivot on that group. We mentioned this before, but our group just consists of all the different pieces. Like once I click off, it's all different ones. I guess I put a camera in here at some point. I'm going to get rid of that. We have all the different pieces, but I can just sort of move this as a group now, which is useful for duplicating. So it seems like there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of these guys. I'm going to have 2 somewhat close together, and then 1 near the end, and 1 in between these 2 dots. I think adds quite a bit of visual interest. But yeah, we definitely filled up the back quite a bit in this part. A bit of a longer episode, or longer chapter, I guess. I know I was a bit more quiet during this one. but just because we didn't really go over too many new techniques. But yeah, happy with how that turned out. We can now, where is it? Take that guy off, which means the next piece we're going to be working on is this larger back plate, which connects to the thing we made in the last chapter. Looking at this, it kind of looks like there is a decent sized gap. It might be a bit harder to tell. This gap seems different. It seems like this is definitely pulled back, so I think as long as we pull this stuff back a little bit, including this metal piece, seems a bit longer, and the next part we'll pull it all back, the gap will seem fine, we'll add this guy in, and then it's just little knickknacks. We got these two guys, we have this piece here, and then boom, diving into the keyboard. The keyboard's the last sort of main component because it also kind of consists of all the inside stuff. But man, we are getting to the meat of this in no time. Seems like I messed this up at some point. Weird. I can fix this off camera, but it just seems like I had to snap that down. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and save, call it a chapter. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next part. See ya.